and welcome to Drunk on Tea. Today I'm going to show you how to paint one of the Tyranid models from the new Introductory Starter Set for Warhammer 40,000. So in the Introductory Starter Set we get the paints Abaddon Black, Wraithbone, Retributor Armour, MacLeod Blue and Nagaroth Knight. You also get a starter brush, which is what I will be using to paint this model. On top of that I have a pallet pad here, but you can use a plate, and I've got a pot with some fresh clean water in it, and of course one of the models from the Introductory Starter Set. So to start with, I'm going to come in with some Wraithbone. I'm going to use this to base coat the model. So first I'm getting some of the paint here onto my pallet pad, putting a little bit of water into it to thin it down, just to get it to a nice smooth consistency. As you can see here, so it runs nice and smoothly and it's not too thick. And now I'm just going to paint all over the model with a couple of coats of Wraithbone to get a good solid cover. By keeping this nice and thin, we're not going to clog up any of the detail on the model. Just work your way around, paint all of it with 2 or 3 coats of Wraithbone until we get a solid cover. Now normally you could use a spray can or something to get that solid cover, but because I'm just using what's in the Introductory Starter Set, I'm just going to do this with a brush using Wraithbone. So you can see after the first coat, still very blotchy, so I'm coming back in with a second coat until I get that solid cover all over the model and none of the plastic showing underneath. Remember to keep the paint nice and thin so we don't clog in any of that detail, and after a couple of coats you'll build up a nice solid cover like this of Wraithbone all over the model. So now I'm going to come in with a mix of Nagaroth Knight and Wraithbone, and with this I'm going to shade that model. So put about 50-50 mix of both these colours together on your pad, mix them together so you get a solid colour of the mix, and then I'm going to add lots and lots of water to this. So keep going to your water pot, adding in water until you get a really thin paint that flows super smoothly. Like, the coverage is not going to be good. We're making our own shade paint with this, so you really want it to have almost a watery consistency. You can see here now it's very thin, flowing really easily. And with this I'm going to apply it all over the skin of the model. Now because this is so thin, it's going to seek its way in to find all of the recesses, and it's going to put the colour into the recesses, giving us a nice shade effect and leaving some of the Wraithbone untouched on the most raised areas. You don't need to worry about doing this over any of the carapace, it's just all of the skin, cover it with a shade of this mix we've made. Really work it into those recesses. Make sure you get this shade into every nook and cranny all over the model to give it that purple colour. And after that shade has dried, you can see how it's tainted all of that skin and really focused into those crevices and darkened those areas up with that purple. So now I'm going to come in with some pure Wraithbone, nice and thin again, much like we did when we were applying that original base colour. I'm going to put this wherever that shade sort of didn't settle, so on all of the raised areas where it's stained purple, but we want it to bring it back up to colour. I'm using just the tip of the brush, keeping this nice and thin, and painting on all of the raised areas. So it's things here like these muscles, putting some of this on the tops of the muscle, leaving that purple in all the recesses of the skin, coming on either side of it with that original Wraithbone colour to bring it back to colour. So keep this nice and thin, not quite as thin as the shade, and we won't obscure any detail, we won't get any blotchy moments or anything on the skin, but we can bring it back up to that Wraith colour using our shade to create the definition. So just work your way around the model and all of the raised areas, bring it back up to colour with a coat of Wraithbone. if after the first coat there are some areas that aren't quite back to colour, coming back in with a second coat of Wraithbone to really build that solid colour on those areas. Once again, keeping this nice and thin so we don't obscure any detail, just working the way back around again, applying another coat of Wraithbone onto all of those raised areas to bring it back up to a solid colour. It's always better to work in 2 or 3 thin coats rather than trying to apply it too thick and obscuring any of those details or getting brush marks. And there we are, after a couple of coats you can see we've brought that colour back up to those raised areas, leaving that shade in the recesses, giving us that really good alien look on the Tyranid. So now I'm coming in with some Naggaroth Night. I'm going to apply this all over the carapace. So all of this carapace armour here on his head, on his back, and there's a couple of bits on his guns and his legs as well. Come in with some thin Naggaroth Night and apply this all over these areas. So be nice and neat at this stage. You don't want to get this over any of the skin that we've highlighted, but just pick out all of those carapace armour panels with a couple of coats of Naggaroth Night. Don't forget these ones here on his legs, and catch these with a coat of Naggaroth Night as well. After a couple of coats you can see we've got a solid purple colour now all over that carapace. So now I'm coming in with some MacLeod blue, and for this I'm going to paint the gun. So try and be nice and careful around these sort of slits in the gun where I've left a little bit of skin showing through. But paint all of what will be the casing of the gun with a couple of coats of MacLeod blue so we get a nice solid blue colour all over that weapon. Once again, keep this nice and thin and just work way around, picking out all of that casing to the weapon with a couple of thin coats of MacLeod blue to get a nice solid blue colour all over. So you take your time around things like the fingers and the hands. We want to try and keep this just onto the casing of the gun if we can. At this point I'm also going to put some blue into the eyes as well. Just having it nice and thin, sinking it into those eye sockets. So the next step now, I'm going to highlight the gun. So I'm coming in with a mix of MacLeod blue and Wraithbone. You can see I've got some MacLeod blue on my palette and I'm just adding some Wraithbone to it until I get a brighter colour that I can use to highlight. So it's about a 50-50 mix, maybe a slightly more Wraithbone into the mix than MacLeod blue. You get a nice light blue colour like this, which I can thin down with a little bit of water again, build a nice tip to my brush, and then I'm going to run around all the edges of all of the details on the weapon. This is what we call an edge highlight. All of the sharpest points, the sharpest angles, I'm coming in putting a thin line of MacLeod blue around them all. So it's around all of these slits, every edge, every fold, every sharp point you can see. Just put a thin line of this lightened mix around all of those as an edge highlight. And with that highlight applied, it's added some detail and definition to the gun. So now I'm coming in with some Abaddon black. For this, I'm just going to apply a vertical line in the middle of his eye that will act like a pupil. Just use the tip of your brush for this. Just get a straight line all the way down. And that's the eyes and the gun now painted. If you're enjoying the video, please press like. If you want more videos, press the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. So now I'm coming in with some Nagaroth Knight and Wraithbone, and with this I'm going to highlight the carapace. So it's a mix, much like we did for the MacLeod blue, sort of 50-50 between the two colours. I'm just running all the way around the edge of every panel on its carapace armour and adding a line. Now these can be slightly thicker than on the gun, because this is what we call a chunky highlight, and it allows us to come in with another lighter colour again in a minute and add a second step to these highlights. So around each edge of every panel, and also do a few vertical lines in the middle of each one. These will act to give us that scratchy highlight that Tyranids have. Also don't forget to do the ones on his legs and on the gun as well. So after that chunky highlight's applied, you can see we've got a thick line of highlight all around all of those carapace armour panels, and a few vertical lines for scratches. So now with that previous mix, I'm coming in with some more Wraithbone now, mixing this in to create an even brighter colour. And get a nice tip on your brush, and then do another line but within that previous one. So just use the very tip of your brush, try and keep this as thin as possible. And in all those scratchy vertical lines we did as well, put another thin line into all of them and go back around and put this thinner line within all of our previous highlight steps. So we've gone from a chunky highlight to a more traditional edge highlight, and these two tones will help build up and make a really nice looking highlight on the model. With that edge highlight applied, it's really made that carapace armour start to pop. So now I'm coming in with some Abaddon Black. I'm going to paint it all over the claws. So every sort of claw, nail and everything like that, I'm just catching with a solid coat of Abaddon Black. Obviously thin this down again, so it's nice and thin, flows nice and easily. Come back through with a couple of coats to build a solid cover of all of these claws, hooves and nails on the Tyranid. So I mean, this starter set is fantastic for a new painter, I think. With these colours you get, you can build on them as you build your collection, and it's a really good starting point for anyone just getting into the hobby. So after a couple of coats, we've got that solid coat on all of those claws and hooves. And now we're going to start glazing some colour onto them. So first of all, I'm coming in with some MacLeod blue and thinning this down with a lot of water. Not quite as much as for the shade earlier, but not far off. You want to get this so it's really, really thin, flows off your brush really easily. Going to glaze this over those claws to create a nice transition and a really interesting effect. So about the bottom 3/4 or so, paint them with a bit of this glaze. Don't worry about it being too thin. We're going to apply other colours on top that will help build up some of that colour, and you want a nice transition through all of the colours that we're going to be applying. And now I'm adding some Wraithbone into this mix, just to brighten it up a bit. So mix it thoroughly, add some more water to get it back down to that consistency we had before. Now from about the halfway mark on each of the claws, apply a bit of this glaze. this being lighter than the previous one, but still nice and thin. It all should build up to give you a nice transition between all of the colours as we build towards a really bright spot on the end of all of these claws. Now I'm adding more Wraithbone into the mix again to create a really bright colour for this final one. So mix it thoroughly and then keep adding water to bring it back down to that glaze consistency. And now with this, I'm just doing the lower part of each of the claws. I'm adding a little bit of this as the final highlight and brightest point. And with those claws painted, you can see the transition that we've built up between those colours, going from darkest to lightest. And now, with some Abaddon Black, there's just one final step to do, and that's to paint all over the base, to cover up any paint we may have got on the base so far. So just work your way around the base, painting it all with a couple of coats of Abaddon Black, being careful when you get around the feet. And with that base painted, that is the completed Tyranid using just the paints from the Warhammer 40,000 Introductory Starter Set. I hope you found the video interesting, and hopefully using this you can paint your Tyranids using just the 4 colours that we used here from the Introductory Starter Set. So thank you very much for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and happy painting!